represent Sunderland and Glastonbury as well.
Leland Morgan, I represent Grand Isle County and Weston. No,
Richard Nelson, Orleans one, which is Derby.
Got it. Thank you so much.
Since we have a number of people in the room who aren't usually here, it's helpful for the committee to know who everybody is. So I'll start. We have Sidonia, the committee assistant. And then why don't we go around?
Deborah Warren, I'm the food security roadmap.
Welcome.
My name is Nick Brody. I'm a student in Governor Douglas's class at Middlebury College.
Okay. My name's Harry Wilson. I'm also a student in Governor Douglas' class.
My name is Elegant German. I'm also a student in Governor Douglas's class.
My name is Olivia O'Reilly. I'm also a student in Governor Douglas.
My name is Jane Kelly. It might surprise you. Amber Perry, Vermont Farm Bureau. Nora Horton, Hunger Free Vermont. And Carrie Saylor, Vermont Food Bank.
Okay, well, welcome to all of you and to the students. I know you could have picked any of 14 committees plus the Senate committee, so thank you for picking ours. All right, good morning.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. My name is Jean Hamilton, and I'm one of the co-directors of the Land Access and Opportunity Board. I want to just start by saying normally my co-director and I present together. Ornella Mata Figueroa is the Director of Advocacy and Community Engagement. And unfortunately, we've had a death in our community, and so we're kind of dividing up tasks today. So I'm sorry that you won't get our best presentation, which is the one we do together. I will try to fill in for both of us today. I'm really excited to introduce some of you who are new to the LAOB to our work, and also for those of you who have supported us in the past, thank you. Really excited to report on some of the work we've done in our first year of being staffed. So as staff people, Ornella and I were hired last January, maybe even like this day, last January was our first. So we have lots to catch up on today. And I'm sorry, could someone just tell me how much time we have today?
So we have an hour.
Okay.
And we built in a few extra minutes in case we run over.
Great,
Does
okay.
that work for you?
That will be plenty of time and lots of time for questions and discussion. So everywhere that we go as the Land Access and Opportunity Board, we start with these touchstones. They are really our guidance on how we work together as a board and also with all of our partners out in community. So I'll just read them now and invite you to consider if you can join us in having this guide the way we work together. First, we listen generously. We speak our truth from our heart and our mind. We make the way we work together an example of what is possible. And we trust that we all hold a piece of the puzzle and that we need each other's pieces to understand the whole picture. So hopefully those resonate with you at some level, and I can welcome you into being guided by those touchstones today. So the LAOB was created by an act of this legislature in 2022. And the purpose that we were created for was to promote improvements in access to woodlands, farmland, and land and home ownership for Vermonters from historically marginalized or disadvantaged communities, and those who continue to face barriers to land and home ownership. The communities that we serve include low-income Vermonters and all Vermonters experiencing poverty. It includes Vermonters with disabilities. It includes immigrants and refugees living in Vermont, Black and Brown and Indigenous Vermonters, the queer community, and psychiatric survivors and survivors of mental illness. So as you'll hear in that list, and we'll talk about a little bit more in our board structure, we work across many different kinds of communities. What we share as communities is that our communities have faced systemic barriers to home and land ownership and access, but each of our communities has unique needs.
Representative Boston.
Do you envision any potential problems in funding because of those designated populations in terms of the federal administration and some of the choices they've made in the last week or so?
I think you can imagine this last week has been chaotic for me, as I imagine it has been for many of you. We do have some funding that is caught up in the turbulence. We have been contracted to participate in a large grant. It's an EPA grant that is intended to fund community-led environmental justice projects. It's a $48 million grant project that is, this $48 million is available for New England states. It is rolling out right now. The first deadline was supposed to be February 14th. This is money that every single one of our communities in Vermont could access and benefit from for stormwater management, infrastructure, climate resilience, flood resilience, food security, lead abatement, indoor air quality issues, pollution issues, mitigating brownfields, all manner of things that our communities could benefit from. This past week, every single day, we have gotten different guidance on it's a go, we're holding back. We're hosting a meeting on Monday to kind of launch this initiative because we've been contracted to be the anchor organization for the state of Vermont, meaning that we would interface and support communities applying. Are literally every day. We're like, are we having this event in Plainfield on Monday or not? Should I cancel it? Should we keep going? So yes, to the federal funding. That said, we do anticipate that, we were written into the governor's budget at $1.6 million. So we do hope that this state house and the administration will continue to fund our work because we are doing really important work that will serve all Vermonters. That is a core tenet of our belief, is that when we serve the communities that are most marginalized and living at the places where government falls down, that actually all of our communities will thrive and benefit. So these are the priority objectives and really the way that our board works. Just briefly, we address historical barriers. So we really look at, where have our state programs and policies fallen down and not served our communities as well as they could. We promote opportunities to access land and home security. And meaning that we look for opportunities like federal funding. We look for opportunities to connect across agencies. We look for new ideas to invest in, innovations that would really improve our community's resilience. Again, we seek out and to create, fund, and build alternative models that fill in the gaps. And broadly, we are seeking to create the economic and social conditions that make Vermont a haven where all individuals, families, and collectives can live, grow, and thrive. These are our appointing authorities, meaning that in our statute, these are the communities, organizations that have named seats on our board. As I said at the beginning, our target communities represent many different kinds of needs, and you see that here in our board members. Our board has 22 seats, so we have 2 seats available for each of these organizations. That structure really allows for us to empower communities that often do not have a lot of staff or economic resources to attend meetings to have a deeper bench. We have very robust participation from our board. We have monthly board meetings and 4 active committees that meet on a weekly, bi-weekly, or monthly basis. The board, as you noted before, was established in 2022. So for about 2 years before staff joined last January, the board was forming and norming and establishing its functionality. Our board is connected to the Vermont Housing and Conservation Board through a memorandum of understanding. They provide our administrative services like HR and accounting, but we do operate completely independently from them in the sense that our board directs our activities and is completely independent from their board. Yes, please.
Right.
I was just wondering what a couple of those organizations were, like Liberation Ecosystems and Vermont Every Town Project, just if you could.
Thank you. Yes. So Liberation Ecosystem is is the legal name and now the new DBA name of an organization that previously was called Vermont Relief Collective. You may be familiar with that body. Relief stands for Racial Equity in Land, Environment, Agriculture, and Food, and it is a network of, I think, like 400 plus Black, Brown, and Indigenous Vermonters that are connected around those issues. And then Vermont Every Town Project is a land access project that envisions that every town in Vermont would have at least one parcel of land stewarded by a person of color, and is really working to activate, help balance out the inequities we see in land ownership and home ownership in the state. Yes. So right now I'd love to pause in my speaking and just give us all a moment to kind of go inward. We know as LAOB that we cannot do this work alone by any means. These problems are monumental and extend to everything that exists in the housing crisis, everything that exists in the land access crises we're facing right now. And we really need everyone's help to do this work. So often when we present with groups, we take a moment to invite you all to imagine that you were in this work with us, that you had our jobs. And so I'm going to invite everyone to just kind of be quiet for a moment and think inwardly, how would you make Vermont a haven for underserved communities to live, grow, and thrive? Thank you. I won't make you all report out what you thought of, but I am really interested to hear your ideas and hope that we'll have time either at the end or at another time to talk about what you imagine. And I hope that taking a moment there gets you in the game with this conversation here today. A big part of our work is really uplifting our community members who lack access to policymaking spaces so that their understanding of our programs and policies, the systems that govern their lives, can really help influence those programs and policies. So what that means is we go out into community, we make it easy for our community members to understand what programs and policies exist, we put things into plain language, and then we ask them to tell us, what solutions do you see? What are the problems your communities are facing? If you were at this table, if you were a decision maker, what would you do? And these are the kinds of needs that our community members identify. I think that every single one of you will see some things on here that resonate potentially with you personally and very likely with many of your constituents. People in our state, and especially our community members that the LAOB serves, need help navigating the systems. They need help understanding what are all these different programs and how do they work. They need language translations, either into plain language or into languages other than English, so that these programs are actually they can even apply for them. Many of our bureaucratic systems, even for English speakers, are impenetrable from a language perspective. We believe very strongly in concert with many of our allies, including our friends at the Developmental Disability Council, that we need plain language translations of everything we do in government. Our community members need financial help accessing homes and land in this state. Vermont, for many complicated market reasons, is becoming increasingly unaffordable for our own citizens to live here. We see opportunities for things like down payment assistance programs and expansion of those to help more people buying homes. We also have heard loud and clear that we need to institute some down payment assistance grants to support land access. So I won't read everything here, but these are the kinds of themes that we're hearing about in our community engagements. As I said at the beginning, I've been in this position for about a year. For this whole year, we've been listening to our community. We've been building bridges and meeting up with the institutions that govern our systems here. We've been talking with federal agencies. We've been talking with legislators and lawmakers, and really trying to understand with kind of fresh eyes, what is this housing crisis about? What is this shelter crisis about? Are we in a situation of there's not enough money, or are we in a situation of there's not enough collaboration, or are we in a situation of the system design is broken? And what we've found after about a year is these are the problems. We see very, very powerfully that Vermont needs more people power. In many cases, whether it's responding to floods or providing for our food security, we just are asking a very small group of people in many of our towns to do too much work, and it's not working. There is a unfortunate disconnect between the public institutions and the people that our institutions are supposed to serve. We see silos all over the place. People who should be talking to each other, not having capacity or not having the goodwill to reach out across those silos and do things more efficiently. We see the compounding crisis of climate control, substance, disease, substance use disorders, homelessness, political mayhem. These crises are now braiding together and undermining like the very spiritual morale that is going to empower our people power. And we see that again and again, those who are most vulnerable are hit the hardest by all of these crises. And that's where we really see a body like the LAOB able to go to those people, the people who are most marginalized, and hear what's happening for you, because that's what's going to happen for all of us. Marginalized communities are hit first and hit hardest, but what's happening to us is going to happen to everyone. This is what LAOB has been working on this past year, and that we're really going into this next year looking at. We are very invested in strengthening Vermont's human infrastructure, stabilizing housing, and improving land access. So again, I spoke to a couple of these things before. We got staff hired last year. We've been building relationships and trust with the institutions. We have deep community engagement work that we do constantly. And we are really laser focused on how can LAOB use our precious resources most strategically to unlock these collaborations, new funding streams, and more imaginative, innovative thinking. Two of the ways we work that work in tandem are community engagement, which I've said a lot of times, so I hope you know this is very important to us. We connect community engagement into one of our statutory powers, which is our advisory powers. In our enabling statute, we have the ability to advise into all of the agencies and programs and policies that impact Vermonters' housing and land access. So our statute names that we have advisory powers with Department of Taxes, Agency of Agriculture, Commerce and Community Development, VHCB, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, VHFA, and on and on. By on and on, I mean, it literally says, and anyone else. So we take this role very seriously, that our job is to listen to our communities, build trust with the institutions, and help advise and work together. How do we improve these systems? So here's a list, which you all have in your slides, of some of the specific areas we've worked on. Because you are agriculture, I'll highlight the land access innovations and also kind of a tie-in with the Act 59 30 by 30 work. Agency of Agriculture recently conducted a kind of community listening session on what is the agency's role in this land access problem that so many of our communities are facing. Their conclusion was, we need LAOB to help us lead this conversation, and it is very much time to take action on these land access crises. So I hope that will be something we can talk about at the end of my presentation. Sorry.
Are you finding that all those agencies, et cetera, are inviting LAOB, to a seat at the table, or do you sort of have to knock down the door and be like, remind them?
Thank you. We find both. There have been some agencies that are, as soon as we landed, we're like, oh, let's meet and let's work together. We've had some, I will say that we have not had any conversations with anyone that ended with, let's not work together. Every conversation we have leads to, this is great, let's keep working together. We have had some directors say, when the LAOB was created, I was nervous. I was nervous about what this meant for us, and especially what your advisory powers meant for us. And I'm so relieved to see it means we're going to work together, and now we have more teammates to help us solve these problems. So we really have led with an approach of goodwill. This is about building capacity for our state. here is an opportunity to look with fresh eyes and to engage the perspectives of communities who have not been at the table and who have a lot of good ideas. And that's what we found with everyone that we've been able to connect with. Of course, we are 2 staff people and we are a board that is stretched thin. So there are many, we have not actually connected with Department of Taxes yet, but we wait until there is something to connect about. And it has been really productive when we have. I spoke a little bit about capacity building. We see this as finding new resources, connecting with philanthropy and hopefully the federal government to help expand what kind of money can come into our state. That means us applying for grants. It means supporting municipalities and community groups in applying for grants. It also means, just generally, how do we build up the administrative and operational capacity of all of us who are trying to care for our communities? We are also empowered to do direct services. So we can do grant making. We can actually make grants into community. And we do, as a board of the state, have the capacity, the power in our statute, and also the administrative capacity in conjunction with that MOU through VHCB to make direct payments to individuals. So this, I'll just stop there for now and we can pick that up. But our legislative priorities for this year, first, we do want to secure funding so we can keep doing our work. Something that is exciting that has developed this year is that we participated in a working group with the Cannabis Control Board that submitted a report recommending that 25% of the cannabis excise tax be allocated to the Land Access and Opportunity Board to support community reinvestment activities. That amount is approximately estimated at $5.6 million. That amount really allows us to start looking at some bigger direct payments into Vermonters' hands to support down payment assistance grants for housing and land, as well as some new financial instruments that can support emerging community developers in building smaller scale, community scale housing. We have a lot of interest from rural communities in building cluster housing that's connected with shared agricultural land and shared open land. And so that's a big opportunity that happens when we team up with this cannabis CCB goal of social equity and community reinvestment and the LAOB's power and capacity. I will note that the governor did announce in his budget address on Tuesday that he does prioritize $1.6 million for the LAOB, which is kind of a baseline how we keep our existing programs going forward. I'm sorry, I keep seeing you. I'm like, yes. We have a couple of housekeeping things we need to do. One of our board appointed seats, which was held by Vermont Psychiatric Survivors, that organization does not exist anymore. And so we would like to find another organization to fill in. So we have some board work to do with statute to update our board list. And then we are participants in a couple of platforms, the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont policy platform. We work closely with the housing community. We are also members of the Food Security Roadmap policy platform. We see a lot of connectivity with land access with those priorities there. And we are also actively participating in the People's Demands for Just Recovery platform, which is really excellent work. And I hope you all have had a chance to see that letter. And if not, I'll make sure you all get it. But basically, many of your towns have experienced catastrophic flooding and know how much we rely right now on a very small group of volunteers to dig us out of that. This is not sustainable. We need better state systems and honestly federal systems to support our communities because we can't keep doing this on the backs of volunteers year in and year out. We're also keeping our eyes on a number of other issues. If it hasn't already become clear, as the Land Access and Opportunity Board, in which we cover all things housing and land, we watch a lot of different parts of the state government. We're looking at fair housing laws. We're keeping an eye on, is the Human Rights Commission and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission getting adequately funded? We are watching very closely for how the Act 250 reforms are rolling out, especially for their impact on that balance between land access and housing. We're watching if the constitutional amendment around the equal protection clause is moving forward and how we can support that. And again, really underscoring how all of these policies impact those in our communities who are most marginalized. I am nearly done here. So this is our FY26 budget. I'll show you here at the top, this 5.6 million, that is the JFO estimation for the FY25 cannabis excise tax, 25%. This second amount, $150,000, that's the EPA grant I was mentioning. That's what we would receive to be this anchor organization for the state. Of course, it says secured, but as of this week, that I would say is more pending. And then we are projecting a carry forward from what we have received from the legislature in the past into FY26. So that all adds up to a nearly $6 million budget. And then this is how that breaks down. I think I'll just keep moving, and if you all want this budget slide to come back up, I'll put it up. But to give you a sort of visual sense, that money is really about direct services to Vermonters. So this blue piece of the pie, that's what we're talking about putting into the hands of our Vermont communities. This gray is our operating and administrative services, including our staff. We are planning to hire a couple more staff people so that we can run these programs. And then that also includes our program supplies and operating needs. The green is our advisory powers and community engagement activities. And then this little yellow slice is what we have specifically dedicated to capacity building through that EPA grant. But embedded in our staff time, we do a lot of general capacity building. And then I just put this here for you all because I know it's hard to track something as specific as what did the Cannabis Control Board report to the legislature this year. So actually, they probably are going to come in and talk with you all if they haven't already, I imagine. This is the report that they submitted. I'm happy to send you all a link to that if you haven't received it directly. And then I've just pulled out the slides that were focused on community reinvestment so you could get a little bit of a context of what is the concept of community reinvestment. I will just state that community reinvestment is now very normal across the other states that have legalized cannabis. And as sort of a corollary data point, New York State is allocating 40% of its excise tax to community reinvestment activities through a body that is very similar to the LAOB. So I believe I'll stop there. And yeah, I can put any slides up that you found interesting, or just happy to talk with you all.
Representative Boswell.
So yeah, I just have one question. You mentioned the idea of developing cluster housing in certain areas, and I'm just wondering how you think that might work in terms of some of the housing requirements for like priority development in city centers. Like, do you know communities that are open to developing cluster housing in perhaps rural communities where they'd have access to doing gardening or not? Could you speak to that a little bit? Because I live in a rural community that's really strict about zoning. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and how that's gonna work in a practical sense.
Yeah, thank you. So this is really, it's a great question that highlights kind of how the LAOB works, because we are working directly with community members who are interested in this. Meanwhile, we are also working with agencies and institutions to look at this. So on the community side, right now, we're shaping up a grant proposal in support of a number of organizations that are working in the Northeast Kingdom to do this precisely, to find parcels of land that can be developed in a PUD or cluster housing model, which allows for maintained open space. It allows for people who don't have resources to buy 100 acres on their own to have some of the assets of being connected to large scale open space. But it also provides a community of care, which is, everyone we talk to says, yes, I need neighbors who care for me, especially as our towns age, our towns face catastrophic flooding and other emergencies. People are really seeing how essential neighbor to neighbor relationships are. So we're connected in the kingdom with a 501c3 that's called Northeast Kingdom Organizing that has basically kind of started as like okay, community, what do you want to do? How can we work together? And then quickly became the muck and gut champions of Hardwick, Greensboro, Craftsbury, Albany. That was not their goal, but that is who they became in 2023 and 2024. And so in the process of helping people literally take the dirt out of their homes and then literally rebuild their homes, they have been able to do very deep listening about what communities need, what neighbors are asking for. And what neighbors need and are asking for is a place to be safe in their community. So if they are displaced by a flood, people in Greensboro and Hardwick do not want to have to move to White River Junction to a motel. People want to stay in their school district. They want to know that there's an opportunity if they need to get out of their Riverside Village apartment, that they have an opportunity to potentially get to higher land and stay in their community. An example of this that's moving ahead in some ways is in Plainfield, where the town of Plainfield is looking at buying a parcel that's in the village, but up on higher land and building out a village expansion, a new village expansion, which of course supports the town in rebuilding some of that tax base that was lost in the flood and also gives a place for all these neighbors who literally had their homes washed away to be able to stay in the community. In the kingdom, there's NECO. There's also Headwaters Land Trust, which is a new community land trust that really envisions underscoring the community part of community land trust. And basically the way those kinds of land trusts work is that they own the land and then individuals own the houses on top of that land. So it's a financing model that allows for much more affordable housing while also maintaining community control of what are the decisions on those parcels. Inside the institutions, we are also working closely with Department of Housing and Community Development, and VHFA and other partners. We were on an Act 181 study group that looked at what happens to our priority housing projects in the new Act 250 paradigm, and how do we make sure that we are continuing to incentivize and allow for affordable housing to be built while also working, building out, what does this mean? What does zoning mean in this new paradigm? What jurisdiction does Act 250 have? What does the road rule mean? How do we support municipalities in thinking about development of housing in inclusive ways? Do we need statewide inclusive zoning? Is that an opportunity? And those conversations are all like live and happening. And I will report from participating in that study group that there's a lot of sense of camaraderie and collaboration across many, many, many towns. And even some of the towns that are, potentially look like, oh, they're intentionally being exclusionary in their zoning, a lot of those towns are citing like, actually, this is a capacity issue. Our municipality cannot manage inclusionary zoning. And so then that's an opportunity to say, how do we support that at a statewide level?
Representative Supranant had a question.
Yeah, thank you. This is great. So this is a very agriculture-centric question.
Yes,
but
please.
Something that I think is likely on the minds of a lot of agencies, organizations, stakeholders is what will happen in the next decade when we consider farmers aging out. And in lieu of generational or familial land transfers, there's still a need for succession planning and trying to keep that land in agriculture. And I'm just wondering if there's been conversations within the LAOB about visions that you have for getting folks involved in some of those land transfers in ways that could be really tangible in terms of addressing some of the barriers that come with getting onto farmland in the first place, whether it's access to resources or capital or anything. And I'm just wondering if those are conversations that are existing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I will let you all know that I come from the farming world. Up until January of last year, I have always worked in agriculture and food systems in Vermont. And so it is a personal, but that is my centerpiece is thinking about viable farming in this state. How do we maintain a culture of agriculture? Because those values are very dear to me personally. LAOB is absolutely thinking about all of those things, and we really benefit from the resources that have been built over the last few decades, like the Farm to Plate Network. This Food Security Roadmap Coalition is an amazing example of how that work continues to evolve. And we are very also connected in with the land trusts and Agency of Agriculture and this conundrum, which is as much financial as anything, of how do we continue to make farming a viable enterprise and also culture here in our state, which I think is something that hopefully at this table we all share. A big part of that is thinking about land access, as you said. And it's not just people who want to get into farming who can't afford land. It is often farmers who are already farming who cannot afford land. We have identified across all of these partners that we need a very strategic conversation that looks at how have conservation easements worked and how have they not worked? How has current use worked and how has it not worked? Where are there innovations? If it's a down payment assistance grant that we can learn from and bring into the state, where can we look at different kinds of models, like putting housing on farmland in clusters that actually make that farmland more accessible, because now there can be farm workers and farm owners who can live with their land. Where can we look at more smallholder agriculture? Where does agriculture live within our households and we don't just keep outsourcing it to larger and larger industrialized agriculture? Recognizing that, that is also part of the picture. We need, I believe very strongly, we need all different kinds of expressions of agriculture to be a viable ecosystem. This is shaping up in near time, so I will not overpromise this, but this conversation with the Agency of Agriculture and other partners of what are we going to do about land access, it is becoming more clear to us at the LAOB that we may be one of the right parties to help really host that conversation. We're relatively neutral. We're new to the scene. We don't have, we don't have positions staked yet. And we have very strong facilitation skills in terms of multi-stakeholder processes. And so we really are, we are concerned about the way working lands seem to be falling out of the 30 by 30 process. We're still sort of poking at that to say, is there room in that very big process to keep looking at what do working lands mean for biodiversity in our state? And we are also ready to really build on this conversation of, if it can't be part of 30 by 30, then how do we have a very strategic conversation across all of us, including this committee, about how do we really protect our land so that we can continue to have a culture of agriculture here in our state. Thank you.
Representative Nelson.
Thank you, Jim. So listening to you, in current use,
Mm-hmm.
fields in current use, 25 acres, 50 acres, whatever, what have you. That could be ideal for your situation, but now we have to carve out a portion of current use to allow housing as it states right now. Are you saying that it would be nice to be able to keep that parcel in current use and not have to pay the penalties towards the homeowners, the stake owners, to have a community and high density housing absolutely would work in something like this, and leaving the bulk of the land open for farming opportunities? Is this what we're driving towards?
Please correct me if I'm not answering your question, if I'm misinterpreting your question. But I think first I'll say I am not a current use law expert, so there's room for me to learn. What I am suggesting is that we could benefit and should benefit from looking at how current use currently, what are the impacts of how current use is structured? Does it, is the 25 acres the right size parcel? Could it be smaller? Should it be tied to property taxes in this way? Is there another way to protect and incentivize keeping land in agricultural use that is different than our current mechanism? So I think you were asking a very specific question of, if we carved out some of that parcel for housing, then does that pop the parcel out of current use? Was that your question?
Well, it ties into all of what you mentioned.
Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah, I think we're operating on the same way.
Yeah.
There are many of us that feel current use should count towards 30 by 30,
Mhm.
even though it's a fluid number. It does absolutely have value to the biodiversity of Vermont. So
And-
I thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and in terms of how we build towards the biodiversity of Vermont, one of the questions that LAOB would like to bring into that conversation is, okay, yes, there are permanent protections. There are ways that that tool makes sense and serves us, and then there are places that that tool falls down. And when we don't address how that, what are the sort of pitfalls of any tool, we tend to lose some solutions. We would like to explore, what does it mean to cultivate a culture of conservation? What does it mean to make land stewardship and support of biodiversity something that all Vermonters feel proud of and can participate in, rather than feeling like you're either in this camp or you're not? How do we actually broaden what it means to do conservation and make that something that people participate in very personally?
I surmise it takes all of us working together to keep agriculture viable
Mm-hmm.
in New England. and
Mhm.
Vermont. And it takes every one of us, the conventional farmers, the organic farmers, the vegetable farmers, the dairy farmers, the goat farmers. It takes the orchards, takes all of us working together.
I will never forget, at the Farm to Plate Network gathering, I think it was maybe now 5 years ago, there was a dairy farmer from Randolph talking about the challenges for staying viable as a dairy farm. And someone asked him, what's the way that this community can support you? What's the most supportive thing that can happen? And he said, honestly, what's most supportive is the more my neighbors can work the land. Gardens, farmers markets, participating in this agricultural culture is what then helps people understand what I'm going through as a farm, what my needs are, and how we can actually work together. And I can't remember if he literally said culture of agriculture, but that's what I heard. And I think that I am a very passionate gardener, and so I can speak from my own experience, and also what I observe is that when we support gardeners and when we support all Vermonters participating in the local food system, there's not just the economic thing that happens of the revenue for farmers, but there's also a cultural thing that happens as land stewards, as people who know what it is to work with the sky and the rain and the soil and living systems. There is a relatability that happens. And to your question previously, Representative, that in terms of strengthening our culture of agriculture, some of that is also inviting in the voices and people who have not been traditionally represented as the farmer, a sort of classic American farmer. There are many people who look different than that, who are very invested in farming and agriculture and gardening. And when we open up our community to say, yes, you can be a Black person and be a farmer. Yes, you can be in a wheelchair and be a farmer. Yes, you can be queer and be a farmer. That actually we have more people on our side supporting agriculture in this state.
Representative O'Brien.
I was just thinking, since we're surrounded by a lot of college students here, what part of LAOB is working with, say, both our education in general, but especially higher ed? Because as we see, at Vermont State University, their agricultural programs, there's, butchering workshops and that now. So are you advising them or working with the higher ed in order to sort of bring along the next generation of people who will get on the land?
Great question. So we have had some sort of organic things that have happened. We got to participate in the Food Systems Research Conference at UVM this past summer, I think it was. We're actually just about to launch a project with Middlebury College's environmental senior seminar, where we will be doing a project focused on how does community engagement lead to better policymaking? You all may know or should know that right now we have many different reports in many different agencies that have all been conducted to identify community engagement best practices and how to do it and how that informs policymaking. And then what we see is very little implementation of those reports. So we are really hoping to leverage the brain and heart power of these brilliant students to help us evaluate what are these reports saying and why can our agencies not put them into practice and how do we do that? That will be especially important in the land use mapping project that all of the regional planning commissions are doing right now that mandates that they listen to their communities and conduct community engagement. Poorly done community engagement can reinforce existing marginalization and discriminations as you just hold meetings that only people with discretionary time and money can come to. And so we're really working with, sorry, I keep pointing to you. I don't know if it's any of you. I hope it is. Your peers and colleagues to really dig deep into how do we operationalize good community engagement, again, with the recognition that having more people with different perspectives helping us build solutions is almost guaranteed, in fact, guaranteed to lead to better ideas. So we have not worked with the state universities at all, but are, great thing to put on this year's agenda.
I wanted to just follow up a little bit on Representative Nelson's question. We had, so yesterday we had a couple of hours set aside to learning about current use.
Okay.
And so we're not necessarily experts in it either. Some of us are enrolled. Some of us might consider ourselves experts. We know a little bit more than we did yesterday, anyway, collectively. But I think it's an interesting thought that we know that there is a penalty for taking land out of that program that's designed, it's intended to disincentivize taking land out of the program. And it can be fairly stiff depending on the circumstances. If that's preventing, as it may well be, somebody from building, developing in a way that we would want to encourage, then that's something worth, understanding better and looking into. The idea is that the general idea historically, we don't want that land to be developed. That's why we are incentivizing, tax-wise, keeping it in ag or in forestry. So interesting thought. I also wanted to ask about the budget, and we heard the governor's presentation on Thursday. The budget is out there available. I have not looked at it at all. So this was news, welcome news that the budget includes that funding. Did the budget also designate the 25% of the excise tax?
No, so we had a chance to meet with the administration in October, so in the fall, to kind of queue up this our original ask, and then the cannabis study group worked right up until the report was due on January 15th. So we did alert the administration that this report came out and we're in favor and we think this is a go. And that's really our work now in the State House, is to explore how feasible this is. The money that is in the administration's budget is one-time money. We would, as a board, really like to get out of a cycle of one-time funding, because of course it introduces a lot of chaos when we could otherwise be doing work. But all of that becomes an interesting exploration when we think about a dedicated funding stream through the cannabis excise tax.
Which is a much bigger number.
It's 5.6.
At it again, right? Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Considerably more. Yeah.
Right. And again, the opportunities that open up with that really just starts to speak to a different kind of scale of programming that we can do. Again, what we're thinking about right now is really focused on down payment assistance grants, so dollars right into the hands of Vermonters so that they can better afford land and housing. And then also developer for capital for new and emerging developers. And I'll point to a project that we're just about to launch. We've been working on for almost this whole past year with the Vermont Housing Finance Agency to provide technical assistance and kind of a cohort learning model for BIPOC developers in our state. This is tied in with other kinds of emerging developers and DHCD's Homes for All program, which really identifies if we need, if we want to build more houses, we need more people developing. We need more different kinds of developers. And so this program was initiated by VHFA, and LAOB has been brought in as a partner. Clearly there are many barriers for Black and Brown developers from lack of intergenerational wealth, discrimination in banking systems, the fact that the developer community is like almost unilaterally white, and within that there can be sort of different layers of prejudice and discrimination that can happen in implicit and explicit ways. So this technical assistance program is really designed to speak to all of those issues. What it doesn't do is necessarily provide additional capital or new and flexible capital that meets the needs of emerging developers. If any of you have ever sought financing for a business or a venture, you know that it is a murky, mystical system. And for people that do not have a lot of inherited sort of capital within that system, it can be very, very hard to get financing. So we're interested in working with VHFA to secure funding that really can be invested in more flexible and targeted ways to all different kinds of community developers who are emerging into the space and may not have the balance sheets or the credentials to secure traditional financing. That kind of program becomes available when we start talking in the $5.6 million range rather than the $1.6 million range.
Are you finding, as you're just getting off the ground and small staff, that you're able to serve the whole state evenly as the board? I know that it's based on organization and affiliations rather than geography, but is there statewide representation?
We do have pretty good statewide representation. We currently do not, let me think, we lost our Windsor County position. We do not have anyone in Windham County, and we don't have good representation from the northwest part of the state within our board or staff. But amazingly, we have 2 board members from Bennington County, so that feels like a success to me. And we are, again, many of our organizational partners do operate statewide, so we're able to work in that way, including both our sort of board appointed seats and also the institutions we work with like VHFA and VHCB. So, sorry, can I say one more thing that I feel like I would be so remiss to not say in this room is that in terms of land access, something that comes up in any land access meeting that everyone says, yeah, that is figuring out a pension system for farmers. How can we create some stability within the economic model of farming that actually gives people the capacity to do farming without having to leverage, counting on their land as the only asset that translates into retirement security. That situation is really creating, is compounding the market forces. And we believe that farmers are like our most basic essential workers. And again, I think we all share the goal of maintaining a culture of farming in the state. And we'd love to really seriously explore what does a pension system look like for farmers.
So a quick question on the 5.6, 25%. Was that earmarked for something else last year, or is it sort of new money coming online as that program ramps up?
It's so the revenue is increasing as the marketplace grows. It is the only thing that was earmarked previously was from the beginning. And I am now starting to speak a little bit into detail of cannabis that I might get wrong, but I think I have the facts here. That is, since the beginning of the launch of the regulated market, 30% of the excise tax has been designated to prevention activities, which has gone to Department of Health and after school programming. That's the only thing that's been earmarked. The regulatory body, the Cannabis Control Board, also draws its funding from the excise tax fund. But then otherwise it eventually rolls into the general fund.
Well, that's good news, just as far as if it's sort of new money, right, as opposed to redirecting it from somebody else who wouldn't be happy.
Right. Yeah.
We will sometime before probably the end of February be asked as a committee to weigh in on parts of the budget. And one piece of that will probably be this request, this line item in the budget, so that we have just a better understanding. And this doesn't need to be the only time we have the conversation, but since you're here, what would the 1.6 million that's one-time funds that you mentioned within the governor's proposal, what would that get?
Right.
For the board?
So our general operating is basically a fixed cost. And then our this advisory powers and community engagement work is not precisely fixed, that there are decisions we can make there, but that's about what we would invest into those activities. That goes towards conferences and convenings and hosting meetings and supporting people coming to meetings through mileage and childcare and food and stipends. Our programs that we are in the process of launching right now are these housing coaches and emergency preparedness grants. The housing coaches program is something we are like imminently about to launch, in which we will contract 5 different coaches who will work full-time, positioned in different organizations around the state to really be like a hand-holding liaison for family members that are trying to secure housing. That could look like finding a secure rental, and it will also look like going through the home buyers process. The point of those coaches is in recognition of how complicated these systems are. And even when we have social workers, embedded in the housing trusts or the housing trust themselves, that there is a lack of capacity within those systems to really provide the kind of like deep support that family members need, often over the course of multiple years, to navigate the home buying journey. Those coaches are also really well positioned to help us have ears on the ground to understand in real life, where do people hit barriers in the system. We know that there are many laws governing the discrimination practices of lenders. We also know that those laws are very hard to enforce. And so when people are actually meeting with a lender, what's the experience? What's happening? Are they encountering discrimination? How do we then take that information as an LEOB up to our colleagues, at the HFA or otherwise, to say, we know what everyone's intentions are. This is what's happening on the ground and where we need to fix it. So that the housing coaches program is built into that 1.6, and then also emergency preparedness grants, which are more organizational facing grants, really building out the capacity of some of those volunteer networks that are doing emergency response and the sort of longer term, long range emergency planning.
Any other questions? Anything else that you wanted to add, Representative Bird?
How long has your program been around?
So we were launched in statute in 2022. The board formed that year, and then basically, was trying to identify how do we work as a board and what does it mean to work within VHCB. Through that, they developed the MOU and then hired the first staff last January. So Ornella and I are the 2 staff, and we've been in place for a year. Just one quick thing is, have you heard from cannabis? Okay, so there are definitely some really interesting agricultural issues within the cannabis marketplace. It's a funny product because it is so agricultural, and yet has not been categorically defined as agricultural in our state. There are many ways that, as someone who comes from like a farm viability background, I recognize that growers and producers face the same challenges that food producers face and other agricultural producers face, and many ways that it would be helpful to have cannabis designated as agriculture. So just want to flag for you, if you haven't heard from the CCB and the Cannabis Equity Coalition, that there's a lot of really interesting policy work happening right now around rights to farm. Do people have rights to farm agriculture? What's happening with proposed setbacks? What does that mean for people participating in this marketplace? And then I just want to flag for you, as a non-agricultural issue, something I learned participating in the study group is that cannabis is not legal in the state of Vermont for public consumption. It's legal for private consumption, which means if you're not a landowner, if you're not a homeowner, if you're a renter, you may not be able to participate in our legal cannabis marketplace at all as a consumer, unless you have explicit consent from your landlord to do so in your rented home. So that's an issue that I really want to flag to everyone, is a real concern for potentially continuing the impacts of discriminatory drug policing policy.
Thank you for that suggestion. We actually have the board, the Cannabis Control Board, on our list of invitees to talk about current use.
Perfect.
But we can expand the conversation.
Great. Yeah. Great.
Right. Well, thank you for the presentation, and I think we'll probably have another conversation at some point, but this is really helpful.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah. And I'll make sure that we get an email out to all of you so you have our direct contacts, and please do reach out if anything else comes up. As I think you've seen, we've gotten to participate in many very interesting conversations for the past year, and would love to hear, how these ideas are resonating for your constituents and what matters to you all. So thanks so much for the time.
Right.
Thank you.
I just quickly, is the LAOB under an agency, or is it sort of a standalone?
We are independent, so we're not within the administration structure at all. And it is a little confusing because our emails come with a VHCB handle because of that administrative MOU that we have with them. So we do operate administratively within that entity, which provides us a lot of really critical kind of support foundationally. We don't have to get our own finance office. We don't have to set up our own HR office, which is very efficient. But we do operate totally independently in terms of our direction. We are directed by our board. They are directed by their board.
Do you have space physically? Are you housed in there?
We are housed right nearby, so not in the brick building, but near it. And yes, and we have office space, which is excellent. Yeah.
All right, we will take a break. We'll take our lunch break and be back